In the bustling city of Austin, Texas, lived a woman named Rebecca Miller, a 42-year-old high school counselor who had always dedicated her life to helping others. Her husband, Daniel Miller, worked as an accountant for a large firm downtown, and together they had raised their 17-year-old son Matthew. On the surface, their lives seemed picture-perfect: a lovely suburban home, successful careers, and a son who was bright and talented. But like so many families, what looked flawless from the outside was far more complicated behind closed doors. Rebecca had spent most of her adult life giving herself fully to her family. She cooked, cleaned, worked, attended every one of Matthew's basketball games, and tried her best to be both a devoted wife and mother. But deep down, she sometimes felt invisible, like her efforts went unnoticed. Daniel was a good man, but over the years, he had grown distant, consumed by his job and stress. Their conversations had turned into short exchanges about bills, chores, and schedules. The laughter and romance that once defined their marriage had quietly slipped away. One evening, as Rebecca sat in the kitchen grading student essays, she noticed Matthew walking in with his backpack slung lazily over his shoulder. He looked more frustrated than usual. Rebecca asked him what was wrong, and he admitted that he was struggling with pressure from school, basketball tryouts, and even friendships. Rebecca, being the empathetic counselor she was, listened carefully and reassured him. She told him that it was okay to feel overwhelmed, and that it was brave to admit it. For Matthew, that moment felt like a lifeline. At school, he was seen as the confident athlete, but at home with his mother, he could let his guard down. Rebecca noticed that he leaned on her more often, coming to her for advice not just on schoolwork, but on life in general. He even began asking her opinion on colleges, career choices, and personal struggles. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, she felt deeply needed. But something shifted unexpectedly. One night, during a heated argument between Daniel and Rebecca about money and household responsibilities, Matthew overheard everything. He watched his father dismiss his mother's feelings, brushing her off as though her emotions didn't matter. Later, Matthew confronted Rebecca, saying, "Mom, you deserve better. Dad doesn't even see how much you do for us." Those words sank into Rebecca's heart. She had felt it herself, but hearing it from her own son left her conflicted. She knew he spoke out of love, but it also made her realize how fractured her marriage had become. From that point on, Matthew became more protective, sometimes even crossing boundaries emotionally. He wanted to shield her, but in doing so, he began to step into a role that wasn't his to play. Rebecca felt torn. She knew her son's intentions were good, but it created an uncomfortable dynamic. She loved her husband, even if their relationship was strained, and she didn't want Matthew to feel like he had to take sides. The household tension grew thicker, and what had once been small cracks in the family foundation began to feel like wide gaps. One evening, Daniel came home later than usual, clearly exhausted from work. Instead of greeting Rebecca warmly, he retreated into his office. Matthew, watching this unfold, shook his head in frustration. He muttered under his breath, "He doesn't even care." Rebecca, sensing the storm building, tried to calm him down. She explained that marriage was complicated, and that while his father had flaws, he was still part of the family. But Matthew's resentment was clear. Things reached a turning point one Saturday afternoon. Rebecca was preparing a family lunch, determined to bring everyone together. She worked hard, cooking Daniel's favorite meal, hoping it would spark some sense of unity again. But when Daniel arrived, he barely touched his plate and spent most of the meal on his phone. Rebecca felt a sting of disappointment, but what hurt her more was seeing Matthew's anger boil over. Matthew slammed his fork down and confronted his father. "Do you even notice Mom anymore? Do you even care about her?" The room went silent. Daniel, caught off guard, lashed back defensively. "Watch your tone. This is none of your business." Rebecca's heart raced as she tried to de-escalate the argument. But Matthew, fueled by months of bottled-up frustration, shouted, "If you can't treat her right, maybe you don't deserve her." The words cut through the room like glass. Daniel stared at his son, shocked and speechless. Rebecca, overwhelmed with emotion, finally broke down in tears. She realized then that the family she had worked so hard to hold together was hanging by a thread. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. Daniel grew quieter, retreating further into his work. Matthew became more distant from his father, spending more time in his room or out with friends. Rebecca felt like she was caught between two people she loved deeply, both of them pulling her in opposite directions. One night, Rebecca sat Matthew down for a serious conversation. She explained that while she appreciated his love and concern, he needed to understand that she and Daniel were adults who had to work through their own marriage. She told him gently but firmly, "You are my son and I love you more than anything. But you can't carry this burden. You can't take your father's place." Matthew's eyes filled with tears. He admitted that he just wanted her to be happy, and that it hurt too much to watch Daniel ignore her. Rebecca hugged him tightly, assuring him that while things were complicated, they would find a way forward as a family. The breakthrough came unexpectedly a few weeks later. Daniel stumbled upon a letter Rebecca had written but never sent. In it, she poured out her heart, her loneliness, her exhaustion, and her longing to feel loved again. Reading it shook him to his core. He realized how much he had taken her for granted, how his long hours at work and dismissive attitude had slowly eroded their marriage. Daniel decided to make a change. He apologized to Rebecca sincerely, not just with words but with actions. He began making time for family dinners, putting away his phone, and listening when she spoke. He even sat down with Matthew, acknowledging his failures as a father and promising to do better. It wasn't an overnight fix, but slowly, the Miller family began to heal. Rebecca felt hope again, not just for her marriage, but for the bond between father and son. Matthew, though still protective of his mother, started to rebuild respect for his dad. The boundaries that had been blurred were now re-established, and the family began moving forward together. Rebecca learned a valuable lesson through it all. That love, even when tested, can be repaired with honesty, humility, and effort. And though that chapter of her life had been filled with pain and confusion, it also brought growth, reminding her of the importance of balance, boundaries, and forgiveness.